A good day, everybody, and welcome to another session of Education for a Better World. I am Abdi Lajavardi, your host, and today I have a dear guest, one of my good friends and colleagues, Dr. Samantha Alperin, that is joining us on this podcast. Welcome, Samantha.
Thank you. Thank you, Abdi. Great to be here.
Wonderful. I'm sure the audience is going to learn a lot of valuable insight from you. And let's start off with learning more about you. If you don't mind, tell us about your journey to this point.
Sure. So I have a background in instruction and curriculum. I am from the Southeast region and did my education here, master's and doctoral work in education. And I taught in K-12, and then I actually went to higher education for over 20 years before I went out on my own as an educational consultant.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So maybe first from an educator, when you think about, a lot of challenges in today's in K through 12 or higher education for our teachers and all the challenges that they have, do you have some advice, maybe 2 or 3 things that can help our teachers, our professors, to make their classes more engaging, more fun, and effective?
So when I think about engagement, I think about understanding who we're teaching. This is not the. I mean, I grew up in the mid 70s and 80s in elementary and high school, where we sat at desks and the teacher talked from the front and we learned and we raised our hands and there was no talking out. And then when I went to college in the late 80s, early 90s for my undergrad, same thing. We were in big lecture halls and it was not a time for, you asked the professor questions after class, you didn't interrupt during class. Then when I went back to do my master's and then my doctoral work in the late 90s, early 2000s, things had changed and the education world had changed, so much so that when I had my own classroom of 4th graders in the mid 90s, I mean, it was no longer is the quiet classroom the effective classroom. And now it's acceptable for children to want to ask questions during class. I taught at the college level for over 20 years, and my classroom was always set up so that I would say at the beginning of class, please interrupt me if you need clarification. And it certainly wasn't the world I grew up in, but I think that we as educators need to be in tune with whom we're teaching and accept that this is a different group that we're teaching these days. And we have to, it's that professional mindset you talk about, Abdi, that you have to change with the times. Carol Dweck wrote the book Mindset, where it's always about professional growth and being in tune with others and being able to accept that priorities change, the world has changed. And I think that even within any discipline, even disciplines like engineering, that while the content might not change, the students change. And we have to be able to work with whom we're teaching and be able to work with whom we're teaching and be able to not only take responsibility for our own actions and our own achievements, but be able to cater to what students today want from us. And so you asked me for two or three things. That was my one answer to one thing. But as faculty, students change, and we need to keep our skills up. We need to be able to provide interactive environments and high quality instructional materials. So no longer can faculty just teach the same thing, we've just pull it back out again and teach it again. Our syllabi have to change. And even though, like I said, I mean, I taught I taught teachers to teach. So everything I did was always changing, but there are disciplines, that don't change. But even though the content might not change, we have to change the approach and how we teach it and what we expect from our students. So like I call it the old guard was curriculum-based instruction. Well, we've changed curriculum-based learning to competency-based learning. We moved from project-based learning to outcome-based education. So we're taking what we've done in the past and we're making it more interactive for our students.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it is so right that making the course relevant has to be to the students, as well as to the changes that are taking place within our hemisphere of education. And the growth is part of professional development. And it is so important that educators continuously look to improve themselves. Now, when you think about, and you being a consultant working with a lot of institutions, school districts, or different universities, what is some of the advice for the institutions of how to create a better environment for their faculty and their students in creating a more cohesive environment?
So years ago, when we would teach lesson planning, we would start with the objectives, and then we just go from one objective to another through the lesson plan, through the assessment. Then we turned that a little bit around the mid 90s, early 2000s, to what we call backward design. And that is beginning with the end in mind. So when I work with school systems, when I work with departments in higher ed, the first question is, where do you want to go with this? Not where do we want to start? Where do we want to end up? So when we think about that outcomes-based education, it's essentially, what are the outcomes that are desired, and how do we re-engage that backward design where we design with the end in mind. And a lot of that, I mean, like I said, our Gen Zers they're savvy. A lot of these students are, I mean, I was a first generation college student in the late 80s, but now these students, second, third, some of them are even fourth generation college students, and that is crossing socioeconomic boundaries. I mean, you can go to college, whether it's a 2-year institution, a 4-year institution, and these students are so savvy that what they want to know is, what is my return on investment? And it doesn't matter if they're at a community college or a trade school or Yale or UCLA. They want to know, what am I going to get out of this? And they're savvy enough to ask those questions. So when I work with schools, it's always, where do you want to go? When we're designing curriculum, what's your end goal? And no longer, I mean, states, whether it's K-12 or higher ed, every state has their standards that they have to meet, where, as far as education is concerned, K-12 or higher ed. But there's an extra component in there we're not just teaching to that test anymore, where we're teaching to real world skills. The school district the area that I live in, their goal is every child's college and career ready. So that's their end. Are they going to college? Are they going to a trade school? Understanding that not everybody goes for a 4-year degree. So it's taking that concept of beginning with the end in mind. Where do we want to end up? And using those goals that the state requires, but where do we want to end up beside the test, beside that achievement test, beside the end of course test? What do we want students to do with it once they are out of our class or out of our school? We want to. It's a trend. It is I want to say universal. At least it's a national trend. What do we want to do with what we're teaching?
Right. No, applicability of the knowledge actually gives more motivation to the students in following, and pursuing that is being taught. I think another part of it maybe is how much they can relate to it, how much they can enjoy it. As you know, you and I have talked offline about really what you enjoy, you have an easier time to learn. So what are some of the things that teachers can do to make the course relevant to the individual, to make it more enjoyable and fun?
Right.
And some of the topics may be sometimes, teachers, regardless of what they teach, they think, okay, maybe other courses you could do these, but not the course that I teach. And I think there are ways that they can make any course more enjoyable and fun to pursue. So what
Exactly.
are advice and things that they can do in making it more relevant?
Exactly. So, Abby, it's interesting you even asked the question, because I always said, and like I said, I taught at the university level for over 20 years, and I taught at a small university, so I never taught with more than 5 or 6 in a department. We were not that's how small we were. So we did our own advising, our own assessments. I mean, and not only did I teach, but I knew my students very well. And one thing I would always say is, if I ever opened my own university, no one would have a major. No one could declare a major until at least their sophomore year. Because, and I would, and it's kind of, I mean, now I look back and I laugh, but at a small school like mine, usually parents would come to freshman orientation. Both my children went to huge state schools. I never would have walked in to an advisor with them. But at my school, we were so small that that's what the parents would show up. And I would always say to the parents, because they would say, well, she just doesn't know what she wants to do. And I would say, well, how come at 18 you have to know what you want to do for the rest of your life anyway? My son's an engineer, knew when he walked in that he was going to major in engineering, and 4 years later he came out as an engineer. But not everybody does that. Some people need to change majors and be able to experience different courses: history, math, science. And that is American education. That is very American. Choose your major, your first day of orientation, and maybe we'll get you out in 4 years, and hopefully you'll like what you're doing. And that just doesn't happen to everyone. One thing I would always say to my students, because some students took my class because they had to, some took it because they wanted to, it was an elective. And one thing I would always say to them is, you might not be interested in what I have to tell you at all. This might not be interesting to you, but my job is to make this as dynamic and interesting to you, so that when you leave after 16 weeks, you might say, yeah, I don't never want to do what you're teaching me, but I learned so much from your class. And I think that's the important thing, is that there's a lot of classes kids have to take. Everybody has to take finite math, whether they want to or not. And it is not everybody's favorite subject, but that math instructor needs to make it the most dynamic class so that when those students leave 16 weeks later, maybe they'll say, I want to be a math major now. Maybe they'll say, I still can't stand it and I never want to look at it again. But my instructor was so good and so dynamic that I learned so much. And I think that's our job as instructors, is to love what we do so much that even if someone never wants to look at what we have to teach again, at least they say, I learned a lot in her class. I learned so much in his class that I'm going to recommend him to another student, because if you want to major in that, you should take this instructor's class. A lot of it is moving from that, like we said, project-based learning to that outcome-based education, and moving from the paper and pencil, let me teach you this and then you study and then we take a test, to I mean, and believe me, I think testing is important. I'm very old school. I think there's a reason for testing, but I also think there's a reason to put other outcomes, such as skills and competency outcomes. So if you're teaching, if I'm teaching a teacher prep course in special education, I'm sending my students out. Or new school, I'm sending my students online and into different classrooms so they can see what is happening in the world of special education. And they're putting a project together and they're coming back and they're telling the class about it. And so it's giving them a new skill. It's not just check, I got 100 on my test, but I learned a new skill that I can apply, I can tell people about. I'm a little more informed about what's happening. And that's an important piece of this also, is, not everybody's going to love system dynamics. It's not everybody's thing, but I think that instructors can make it interesting enough that students get takeaways.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Now, what I was going to ask you, because, you have had tremendous experience, both in K through 12, higher education, your own experience as a student, as a professional. What do you think of mentoring, and how early is appropriate to have mentoring, and how should people go about identifying a mentor for themselves? And a follow-up question is, what do you think the role of the school and institution is in promotion of mentoring and establishing a program so people can benefit, or even the staff can benefit from a mentoring programs?
That's a great question. So a part of, I always taught intro to education, and we went back centuries, talking about how education started in the United States. And apprenticeships were our first teachers. We go back to 1400s, 1500s, way before that. People were learning because they were doing apprenticeships. We didn't have colleges back then. You learned when you were 10 years old how to put a roof on. You learned carpentry. You learned woodworking. And that happened for so many years that they turned it into the word apprenticeship. And it was how you got a job one day, how you learned a skill. Now, I mean, we also talk about the fact that, way back in Once Upon a Time, that it was necessary. If you didn't do that, then you weren't able to make any money and provide for your family. That morphed into, and we had that in place in this country through the 1800s, through colonization. That's how people learned. That's how people got jobs. our first doctors weren't in 4-year medical schools. They learned it as a trade and got good at it. I think back to, I actually think I think my husband's dad, I think he only went to dental school for, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years after undergrad. And of course, he's 92 now. So it hasn't been that long in this country. We're talking 100 years or so where professional education has become a thing, where you major in biology and you go to medical school, or you major in history and you go to law school. I think that these opportunities to learn these skills and be provided with mentors has to start in middle school. It is, I remember my parents, I remember them saying to me, well, you can be a doctor or you can be a lawyer. And I don't think this is the doctor they intended for me to be. But I would also venture to say that they also didn't know what a PhD was. Also, to them, a doctor is a medical doctor. And then when my son went into engineering, I remember thinking, isn't that so great that he learned about this in high school? I would have never known what an engineer was in high school. I had no idea what that even meant. So introducing children at probably the middle school age, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, to what can you do with these skills that you're learning? Science teachers taking students out in the field and showing them that not this is photosynthesis, but this is what you can do with this. Wouldn't it be interesting one day if you cured cancer? Math teachers also showing students, this is calculus, but but there's something beyond the test. You should be able to do something with this. Very few professions offer clubs at the high school level. Future Teachers of America is one of the only ones I know of that actually offers a club at the high school level if you are interested in teaching. And the most interesting thing about that is that we still can't get teachers, and there's a club for it. So a lot of high schools have STEM education now, which I think is great, but are they teaching the students the skills in those STEM areas, science, technology, engineering, math, so that they might be interested in not just this is a track we have in high school, but what can you do with STEM careers? So offering them that mentorship at the middle and high school levels. Then at the college level is another place we kind of lose them. If you're not doing well enough in Calc 1 as a freshman college student, you've probably bought yourself another year in an engineering program. So we need to implement mentors at the college level within the schools to say, okay, let's talk about this. If this is something you really, really want to do, we need to figure out a way for you to do better in this class. On the other hand, there are students who will say, I chose my major in early childhood education, but I don't really like this, and I'm not sure what to do. Being able to take that student and say, what would you be interested in doing? And let me introduce you to somebody who does this. Alumni who are coming back and holding workshops, anything to show that we're implementing that mentorship, whether it's one-on-one or in small groups, so that students are able to learn and see what's out there in this world. How do all these people become pilots? They didn't just wake up one day and fly a plane. There was a progression they took to get there. Some went to college and some didn't. Some decided to go military. But you don't know this unless you're exposed to it at very young ages.
Thank you. Very well. Yeah, I totally agree. I believe mentorship is something that can have a major impact on people's life. And, I think The sooner individuals are introduced to that, the more the institutions are facilitating such programs with the help of their staff. The better the outcome of it can be. So now let me ask you about something you mentioned earlier. I always talk about this, and I ask the guests of one, what is your professional mindset's definition? Because everybody has their own definition. And then, how important has it been in your life having a professional mindset?
Right. As I mentioned, I was a first generation college student. I had 6 majors as an undergrad. I didn't know which end was up, but I was always so interested in learning. And so even though my undergrad major did not match what I finally did in my career, I've always been interested in learning. So I would say that my professional mindset I usually talk about it in 3 parts. The first one being the growth mindset and being able to seek new opportunities and skills. As an instructor, you can never cheat on my tests because I always had a different test. That was just what I did. I didn't have a test bank. I would read my students, like I talked about earlier. I would see what they needed, and and my syllabus would change, my tests would change, my projects would change. My students would get so frustrated with me because they'd walk in, they'd say, well, so-and-so said you did this last semester. Well, we're not going to do it this semester. I'm changing it up this semester. I would drive them crazy. But it's also about taking responsibility for your actions also, that if I didn't teach it to you, I shouldn't be testing you on it either. And in a program where I would teach teachers to teach, that was something important. They needed to learn. You can't just drag it out of a test bank and test somebody on something you never taught them. So always seeking opportunities to improve my skills and be able to impart that information on my students. Another part of professional mindset to me is finding talent. Being able to identify people who are good at certain things. I just did a project for a K-12 school where we totally revamped the administration and who was doing what. They had the wrong people in the wrong roles, and we needed to capitalize on strengths instead of weaknesses. And once we moved everybody around and we put them in, we realized that it wasn't the people. They had smart people. They just needed to be put in the roles that they were doing the best at. And then the third part is I call, well, I don't think I coined the term, teachable moments, where if you look up a definition of professionalism, it's being able to focus on one thing, even though 10 other things are going on around you. And I think that is very important. I also think the idea of teachable moments are important also, that if a student raises their hand and says, I was walking across the street and they were doing exactly what you were talking about, being able to suspend that thought for just a minute, acknowledge what the student is talking about, and as long as it has to do with the discussion, and then coming back, refocusing, and moving on. So I think that my professional mindset takes those three steps for me.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to, ask you about the role of technology in education, and particular, higher education. Again, is an area of your expertise. Can you put some light on that, please?
Yeah. So we've moved from let's stick a PowerPoint on a screen and see if everybody can learn from that. And that we took it to a new light during COVID, but I think we were doing this way before COVID hit. The UX UI, the user experience versus the user interface. The user experience being something that I think that I've been doing this for, if I was in higher ed for over 20 years, I was probably doing a user experience for 15 of them, where whether it was technology based or not. So the UX, it could be technology based, and maybe it's not. That's when, like, I would take my students on field trips. We would actually be experience different things. We moved it into the UI, the user interface, which is digital only. And that's when we saw the emergence of all those learning management systems, Canvas, Blackboard, Moodle. And we started putting that user experience into the interface. What I really thought was important about that, though, was the concept of not just throwing things into the LMS and hoping somebody would open it up and start learning from a PowerPoint or an article, that it was actually, it was combining the UX and the UI. It was combining the experience and the interface. And I think that's the most important part of these online programs, is not, we can see from the instructor's point of view how many times someone goes into Canvas or Moodle or Blackboard and opens it up. But we want to see more, okay, they opened it up, but what were they doing in there? Were they accessing the chat rooms? Were they accessing the discussions? Were they accessing the other resources I put in there? That they didn't just go in there, look at the assignment, press send, and they were done. We want it to be an experience. That's another thing that our students are very savvy at, is they might not want to talk to you in person, but they are happy to sit in the chat room and talk all day long. That's their social lives. I mean, it's very interesting. They want that hybrid kind of socialism, of social. They want to be in a classroom with you one day, and then the next day they want to be online, and then the next day they want to be out in the field doing that outcome-based learning. So I think it's really important to mix the traditional with the digital and make it as interactive as possible. I mean, we've seen Zoom has you can put everybody, you could put them in 10 different chat rooms, and as the instructor, go into each of them. I've held courses where I leave my Zoom up and they're jumping in and out and asking me questions, but doing their own work on the side. So the digital is, I think at first people were like, oh, digital equals lazy. And I think that might have been a way that students thought they could get away with having an online course because you didn't have to be in person. Instructors thought I could get paid for teaching a course and not be there. It is actually so hard to do these digital courses if you do them right. But if you do them right and you do them interactive, they can be so rewarding and the students can learn so much. I never taught at a university like this, but I've actually heard that instructors who teach online courses actually get paid more because you're doing so much more work than being in person. But I think this age group really they like both. They like to be with you, but then they like to be without you. But if they're without you, they expect a return on their investment. We saw so many private schools. Parents were saying during COVID, oh no, if my kid's going to be sitting online doing a class, I can pay state school tuition for that. We don't need to pay private school tuition. And the private schools were saying, oh yeah, we need to up our game. We need to make this Harvard quality, Yale quality, small private school quality, And because the state schools were running with it and they were doing it and they were capitalizing on it. So, and we saw, unfortunately, during COVID, the schools that had to shut down because they couldn't get students in anymore. So we just, digital, I think, is fantastic. It is the way we're moving, but it has to be top notch. It has to be high quality, and faculty also need to be supported for both creating the courses and not only creating and designing, but maintaining those courses and not pulling them back every semester and using old material. Faculty really need to be supported with online learning as well.
No, absolutely. Explained, and thank you for that, because the world is changing right in front of our eyes, and the knowledge needs to be updated, and the applications of it, how it's used, needs to be upgraded, and sometimes totally changed. And that only happens when, as educators, we have good relationship with the industry and are aware of those changes.
Agreed.
So let me ask you a question about both, and you answered one of them actually on this question that you talked about technology. But what are some of the challenges as well as opportunities that exist for our educational institution and educators in general?
So I think we have opened a world of opportunities with online learning. We have been able to, I actually have been working with a completely online university, a completely online teacher preparation graduate program. And being able to serve students in so many different areas, this university in particular serves a lot of military personnel who want to teach. And so they might be sitting on a base, a military base in Florida, and want to become a teacher. And this is an opportunity for them to be able to work on their degree and probably have some of it paid for by the military. And this university is capitalizing on this because they are able to serve this student with courses and dynamic interactions, and being able to, even though the university is based out of DC, they're able to serve these students right now all over the country. I think their plan would be to serve them all over the world, but there's so many opportunities for that. And I think a lot of universities are moving in that direction, where they're trying to get students from all over. No longer does the University of Tennessee need to just draw students from Tennessee. They can draw students from all over. And they're also state schools are capitalizing on this, because if your home address isn't in that state, you can still collect out of state tuition. So, but somebody heard about a program and wants to do that particular program, and they're able to offer it. Opportunities for students have been tremendous. While I'm a learner at heart, and I don't necessarily, when somebody says I want to graduate a year early, this is very American of me. Why would you want to graduate from college a year early? Why would you want to do that? But they're able to. They're able to take courses all year round because there's an online consortium, and they're able to take the courses. And sometimes it's financial. They need to get out of school in 3 years' time because they can't afford that fourth year. And now we have opportunities to do that. My daughter studied in England for the year. That opportunity wouldn't have presented itself 20 years ago. More like 30 years ago, my colleagues, if you studied overseas, you practically bought yourself an extra semester or year in school, because there was no taking online classes. You took the courses you could at the university out of the country. If they transferred in, great. If not, you had to stay and do the courses. when she did this, and it was seamless. She come back for her senior year. So there's so many opportunities for faculty, for students to be able to take courses that the university doesn't offer. I've seen a lot of schools do online agreements with other universities so that students can take courses and they can seamlessly transfer into their universities. Even at the high school level, I've actually seen programs that allow high schoolers to study overseas or do a gap year between high school and college and get that and have all that transfer back to a school so they don't lose any time. I've seen amazing opportunities, but even with those opportunities, the right people have to be in the right places. I saw a very large school system really, really hurt themselves. After COVID, they opened up a K-12 school within the school system. But what they did was they allowed teachers to teach in the K-12 online program who were not the best at doing online learning. It was that the teachers, they wanted to stay home. They wanted an abbreviated day. They thought it would be easier to do that. So that you can't choose the people who think it's going to be easy to run these kind of programs, because it is inherently much more difficult. It takes much more skill to be both a teacher and a learner in that kind of environment. But if you can do it, the world of opportunity is amazing.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with us. And it is a wonderful word, and I think being a teacher and a learner at the same time is the best of both worlds. So I can tell you how much I appreciate you, and thank you for being a guest in our podcast. Education for a Better World is sharing individuals like yourselves insight and experience with everybody else. So with my thanks and appreciation, I wanted to ask you if you had the last word that you want to leave with our audience. Opportunity for that, please.
I mean, if I just had like a what, just one tagline, just keep learning, just keep learning. That keep your mind going. It's the best muscle you have, and it just opens a world of opportunities. So thank you so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to have you here. Have a wonderful day.
You too, Abby. Thank you.